All right, guys. Well, we're going to get a double dose of Belle and Sebastian right here. We're going to do Tiger Milk and If You're Feeling Sinister. On Tiger Milk, in the opener, you heard Expectations, and now you're going to hear She's Losing It. I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth between my notes because there's like two different ones right here to write down what's there. So that would be from the Tiger Milk one, which came first. And then in the opener, you heard Me in the Major, and now you're going to hear Like Dylan in the Movies, which is fitting.
But in the first moment I'm waking up, she knows she's losing it. Yeah, she's losing it. When the first cup of coffee tastes like washing up, she knows she's losing it. Oh yeah, she's losing it. Take a tip from me, took her to the park. When you're on your own, it's a long walk home. Well, if they follow you, don't look back. Like Dylan in the
All right, Matt, run down all the numbers for Belle and Sebastian.
All the numbers. So we'll start with Tiger Milk, that by Belle and Sebastian. That comes in at number 105 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums. Number 9 in 1996. Number 614 of all time. It's their second highest album behind If You're Feeling Sinister, which is number 26 in the 1990s on Best Ever Albums. Number 1 in 1996. Number 127 of all time. And in Rolling Stone's list, it looks like If You're Feeling Sinister made the rankings at 481. Tiger Milk did not. And Belle and Sebastian ranked number 105 of overall artist on Belle and Sebastian Best Ever Albums. I'm just, wow, 105. That's high praise.
Yes.
Yeah, what a bio this is. And this is definitely a bio that could not have happened in the United States of America right here. I'd like to start by saying that. And this is I don't know, are you guys familiar with the origin story of Belle and Sebastian?
I did. I had a little time on my hands. I did see.
Oh, you guys looked at. Oh, see, you're not supposed to cheat like this.
I know. I usually don't, but I did this time for whatever. But yes,
I only know
ahead,
that
John.
they're Scottish.
I'm not going to say anything.
Right? That's the only thing I know about them.
And that's enough. Just, Josh, you did good. Matt cheated. But so Belle and Sebastian started, and this almost sounds fake in terms of what it is, but it's a real thing. What happened is Stuart Murdoch, who's the lyric writer of Belle and Sebastian, as well as Stuart David, who's in the group, and one of their professors of music, Alan Rankine, were at Stowe's College, and Stuart Murdoch applied for a grant in Glasgow, Josh, for unemployed musicians to be funded by the government to put out music, basically, as like a social welfare type program, funding the arts type of program. Things that never happen in America for 100 right here, but like do happen in, Europe. Social democracies of Europe. Yes, along the way. So this is basically Stuart Murdoch had chronic fatigue syndrome and was writing songs and just started playing them with a collective of musicians that he kind of brought together to record the album. So how Tiger Milk comes together is he just uses this grant to kind of catalog the year's worth of songs, right? It's kind of like a true art project along the way. But people then heard the demos of the album and said, you should really make a full album out of this. So he just creates a band. And in 3 days, they create Tiger Milk, which is the first album that we're going to cover tonight. It ends up being a 7-piece band. He's on guitar and vocals. And then I love this. That I read initially on the first sources we went to, how this happened, and I had to deep dive on this. But initially they described it as he recruited members of the band by instinct at a local all-night cafe, which made me laugh because I'm like, what does that look like by instinct? But basically it seems like what happened in my research is there was this all-night cafe in the area he was living. Musicians would come in and sort of what seemed to be like a open mic / show your own wares type of situation. And whoever he liked, he would just kind of bring in to play. And so he finds Sarah Martin on the violin, Stevie Jackson on guitar, Chris Geddes on keyboards, Stuart David on bass, Isabel Campbell on the cello, and Richard Colburn on drums. So I'm fascinated because it's not only are you finding these random people locally, but you're also finding a mishmash of different instruments, right? You're finding strings, a traditional band, another guitarist, a keyboardist. It's kind of like, I want all the things. All of them were college students. And basically they together as a group made a goal that they were just going to kind of keep the group small, let it be sort of like an art house project, and like not let being in a band be something that was part of their lives. They were going to have lives. They were going to do this music recording, and it was going to be cool, right? Like they basically were like, we're going to go super indie, but without any aspiration, right? They kind of informally agreed that they were going to release 2 albums, maybe another one, and then break up. But they record 1,000 copies on vinyl only of Tigermilk on Electric Honey Records. And buzz starts to generate big time, specifically in England. It's getting word of mouth. Critics are getting a hold of this and being like, oh shit, this is great. Now, we've heard this story before with different groups, but usually they were trying to be famous, right? And then it was like they broke, right? This was the opposite. This was just like they recorded this thing on like a government welfare project, and then suddenly it starts spreading around. And they officially became a band after that, but they kind of weren't super comfortable with that because that was not what their design was. So they kind of didn't really do interviews. They didn't share any information. They didn't really promote their shows. Their publicity photos were people that weren't them in the group to kind of keep a level of anonymity. Like they'd send pictures of the band, but it would be like none of them along the way, which is kind of funny, actually, in many ways, which I think is there, but not in like the Gorillaz way, right? This is more just like sort of like we would like to keep our privacy. And they also, interestingly, when they would play their music, they wouldn't like play shows. Like they would play shows, but they would also play like coffee houses, people's houses, libraries, churches. So it's kind of an interesting mix of, like this really small scale thing, but they're also becoming like indie darlings super quick in a way that seems incredibly fast for the 90s, because it seems like it could happen now in 2025, right? But, with social media and, you heard all kinds of stories about like MySpace, in the 2000s and stuff, but it seems like it would have to go slower, but it didn't really. And it went so quick that the second album they were working on, If You're Feeling Sinister, was released the same year, in this case, November 1996, on a different independent label, and starts to not sell great, but sell a little bit more and get, even better word of mouth. And actually, it gets released in America on an EMI subsidiary called Enclave. And while in the UK it breaks a little bit more into the mainstream, it certainly doesn't break in the mainstream in the United States, but it immediately begins to resonate with all of the tastemakers in like independent music. In England, you could get a copy of this album because it was so out of print, Tigermilk, right? I should say this album, meaning Tigermilk, the original one. Because people were listening to If You're Feeling Sinister, which was widely available, people got curious in Tigermilk, but there still were only those 1,000 copies. So people were like paying like £75 for it and stuff like that. Meanwhile, as that's happening, Enclave, their American record company, like goes bankrupt and closes. So they have like absolutely no promotion outside of like, the indie press kind of.
Yeah.
And, and then the next year, 1997, they just, throw out 3 EPs throughout the course of the year. Dog on Wheels, Lazy Lion Painter, and 369 Seconds of Light. So they released 2 albums and 3 EPs in a string of like 15 months, which is there. And yeah, I could go more and more into this, but it would be a huge bio, but that's kind of how this comes about. It's sort of, it didn't exist, and then it did exist. And not only did it exist, but it existed enough that we have 2 albums that we're going to cover at the same time, both of which are very well regarded by critics. But it's a very interesting origin story. There aren't really, we've done CTS now for 6 years. We have pieces of their story have come up in other bands, but it's almost like a paint by numbers of just slapping together like 15 different origin stories, right, into like one origin story of a band. Like the anonymity mixed with like the word of mouth from a demo, mixed with like we were in a college town and kind of like built out. Like all of these different things are kind of coming together. I think it's also, indie rock at this time, it existed, but there still wasn't like a large scale proliferation network, like there would be in like the early 2000s, right? With like Pitchfork and the internet and all these places. It still was very much like magazines you'd buy, especially import ones, and like college radio stations, right? Which even they were losing it a little bit. So in some ways, like their rise makes sense in like an 80s construct and makes sense in like a 2000s, 2010s construct. But in 1996, it's even more unique as an origin story. So there you go. I might build in some other things I learned about them when we're talking. But yeah, Matt, what'd you think of this one? Or these ones?
Wait,
yeah,
Matt, before you... Just to recap, so like Tigermilk was their first album, but it was like limited release. Then they like blew up and then put out a second album.
It's kind of like, it's funny because I don't even know if you would call it an album, because it was designed to basically be like an art project, right? It was like a collection of songs, right? That you'd put together like sort of like odds and ends, right? Like where, like Minor Threat or Bikini Kill, they collected a bunch of songs and made them like EPs and then full length. It kind of was like that, but if you were just like, let me release an album as a art project. And so like that was in the world with 1,000 copies. And it got so much buzz that they recorded an album proper. And he had so many songs that the turnaround time for that was quick. And so it got released and then people went backwards. But because the timeline was so short, it wasn't like, oh, I listened to Nevermind, let me go backwards to Insecticide and Bleach or something, right? It was more just like these things existed at the same time. Just one accessibly and one not at all accessibly.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. Thanks. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. So Belle and Sebastian is one of these bands that we've talked about, similar, that, I've been aware of them for years and years and years and know very, very little of them.
Same. Yes.
Though
Same
I know
here.
Though I know some of their stuff, like the song Expectations, the second song off of Tigermilk, was put onto a mix. A buddy of mine put it on a mix, and I remember that kind of standing out for me, as well as just the voice in general, because I think Stuart Murdoch kind of has a pretty distinctive voice that I've heard here and there. I remember the scene also from High Fidelity, where the one guy's putting on, this quiet song. Jack Black walks in. He's like, what are we listening to? This is sad bastard music. It's like, I don't. So I kind of had the vibe for that. So I thought I kind of had a decent idea of what this was, and I still did, but like I did not give this nearly enough credit, or nearly like I loved both of these records. This is a really nice find for me. I mean, it's touching in so many different areas of things that I like. Certainly the melody is there. It's like slathered over each and one of these songs. I like the variety of the instrumentation. I think the implementation of like a lot of the horns and like the cellos and stuff like that, the non-traditional rock instruments, are used very well throughout here. I wouldn't say that they are that they overpower any one of the songs. I think that they are used, much like we were talking about Praz, like used in the right way with the Fugees. Like the way that they use these instruments are used quite well throughout these records, and I think none of it overstays its welcome. I think that there's stuff that's a little bit more full band. You've got stuff that's a little bit more acoustic. Electronic Renaissance was a really interesting song in light of all of this. I mean, it's kind of like, it's an electronic song. It's kind of maybe the
Tigermilk, just for reference.
From Tigermilk, the middle of that record, you throw in this like electronic song that's like, wow, that's the only time they ever really did that, Right. So you're throwing that in there. But this album also seems very ahead of its time, because this is kind of the sound. This is like indie rock from the 2000s and even today. Like there's stuff that comes out today that sounds like this. This is kind of like a sound that kind of once it started, kind of entering the indie rock sphere, it's kind of had a staying power, right? And there's reason for that, because it sounds great, and if you can write a good hook or a melody around that, that's going to be very appealing to people. So I don't know. And I listened to both of these records. I know If You're Feeling Sinister is kind of gets the credit for being as being their best album. Like I looked at several lists, like, rank the Belle and Sebastian albums, and If You're Feeling Sinister is number 1 on all of them. Tigermilk usually is number 2, but I've seen it as far back as like 4 or 5 as well. So I didn't really get that. To me, I don't know. They're 1A and 1B. I didn't really find a whole lot of difference. Maybe there might be some stronger songs on If You're Feeling Sinister, like that song I think is great. Me and the Major's an excellent song. There's a little bit more, maybe there's a little bit more refinement that's going on in the second record, but I don't think it's by a whole lot, to be quite honest. I think that these are very kind of excellent and similar, but in a good way,
Yeah. Right.
So yeah, it's one of those things that I'm like, man, it's for someone that loves the Beatles so much in melody and also loves this kind of indie rock sound of like, of different sound, like the Decemberists or the Shins that kind of throw in different, instrumentation or things like that. This is kind of right up my alley.
You know what they were billed as by the record company?
What?
The Smiths meet Nick Drake.
I wrote down Nick Drake.
There is definitely some Nick Drake. There's Wes Anderson, right?
Yes.
This is like Wes Anderson. This you can see this being put in a lot of Wes Anderson films.
Yeah.
Like that quirky kind of, 2000s, whatever Wes Anderson vibe. So yeah, I see that as well. But yeah, and I also read that there's great lyrics in here, and one day maybe I'll pay attention to them, so John can talk more about that. But I was just floored by the music. I was just kind of focused on that, and I really enjoyed it, and I was like kicking myself for not like learning more about these guys earlier. But I'm glad we are now, and this capped off a great week. Like, this is an excellent week for records. I thought I loved every one of them. They're very high regards for all. And I don't know how I'd rank these two. I'm fine looking at it as a whole, because that's kind of, I don't know, that's how I took it in these last couple weeks. So yeah, big thumbs up for me.
Yeah, I knew so little about this band. I assumed that it was like a male-female duo just because of the name Belle and Sebastian. I also
yeah, which one's Belle, John?
Yeah, I think I also...
Well, they're named after the show, the mid-90s show, right? Okay. Belle and Sebastian. So
I also
remember, yeah,
conflated it with the Cocteau Twins, I think, because I didn't know them before the ship, before CTS. So like, I think I just kind of lumped it all together in my head, and I never listened to either's music. So
bands that sounded like they should sound similar. Is that what it was? Okay,
yeah,
gotcha.
Maybe so. So yeah, I think maybe also the John Cocteau, the French artist who did A Beauty and the Beast. Anyway, he's a French director, and yeah, I was. These albums are growers for me as well. I wasn't immediately grabbed by them. I think I listened to If You're Feeling Sinister first this week, and then Tigermilk, and then I flip-flopped them when I listened to them again. So I kind of had different experiences, weirdly, both times listening to them based on the order. When I first thought, I was like, oh, this is just like Nick Drake, like wannabe. That's kind of the vibe I got when I was listening to If You're Feeling Sinister. And then when I got to Tigermilk, I was like, oh, this is way better. Like, I liked kind of like what you were saying, Matt, with like all the different instruments, the synth stuff I really thought was good. I think there's some kind of like, I don't know, there's like you said, the horns are in there. They kind of got some weird, like, I think they're doing some interesting things with the synth, but they also have like other keys. I feel like there's like a kazoo or something at some point, or like some, I don't know, they're like you said, it's well seasoned. They sprinkle these things in enough to like grab me, and then the kind of the melody and kind of the song structure carry me through. But then I listened to and so then I was like, oh, Tigermilk's my clear favorite, because I thought there was like more going on. It sounded like more complex, like more of a full band. Whereas If You're Feeling Sinister felt more stripped down, like you said, and was more just like him and the guitar. I just kind of felt like that was more just different vibe. But then when I listened to them again in the reverse order, I was like, oh, If You're Feeling Sinister is pretty good. Like there's some depth here that I wasn't picking up on the first time, and like it wasn't just like him and an acoustic guitar or something, and like and then I was like, so maybe this is the better album, and like Tigermilk's not as good. But then I like heard Tigermilk, I was like, no, I think I still like this more, but like I appreciated If You're Feeling Sinister more. My one critique is I thought, maybe it's just him singing for like almost the entirety of the albums. There is some people kind of singing backup. There's a woman that comes in at one point for one of the songs. I would have liked to hear like maybe some more duets or like harmonizing or something. I think that would have added something for me to this. But overall, I really liked both albums. They're kind of they're very pleasant. You know, the Decemberists were definitely like the other band that I wrote down immediately. They have that pleasant kind of vibey, like cottagecore sound to them. And
is that a thing? Cottagecore?
Yeah, it's all like design aesthetic. And
I know what you mean.
You're really right. You're right too about the West.
I can't believe you didn't know that, Matt.
I never heard that. The cottagecore.
Mm-hmm. So it's pleasant. It's like pastoral in a way. It's like, you know, comfortable, you know, cozy, that type of thing.
Yes.
And that's kind of what I get. You know, they're not going too hard. It is the Wes Anderson vibe too. It's very like, it's also like very like intentional and manicured and like thought out, I guess would be the other kind of side of the coin to it. And I feel that on both these albums. And so I am intrigued by this. I am not like grabbed completely. I think there's definitely enough here, kind of like with Slater Kinney in my review. Like, I'm interested to see what else they have. I think they are kind of like a highly regarded band, especially like among indie, you know, pop and indie rock. And I think I can see the foundation for a lot of, like you said, Matt, a lot of the bands to come. And so that's enough for me to give an endorsement and to be interested to see what else. I have heard their third album, not heard, I know the name sounds familiar, The Boy with the Arab Strap. I feel like that's kind of a highly rated one as well, but they may be one of those bands where like all of their albums are highly rated. I don't know.
Well, that's their third highest rated album. And don't forget, Josh, they're almost cracking the top 100 artists of all time on best ever albums at 105. So
Bob Dylan, here we come.
Yeah, that's right.
But this was good. I'm interested to hear what John thinks about the albums.
Well, let me start with the transgression here a little bit from the general topic, which is it's funny you guys mentioned that you weren't familiar with them, because I had a friend who loved Belle and Sebastian, who I thought had good taste in music. But I realized that one of the reasons I think I never listened to Belle and Sebastian, besides there's only so many things you can listen to, right? So you make choices, was the name. It just was a name that I was like, I don't think I'd like a band named Belle. I remember the show on like Nickelodeon or whatever it was on, and I'm just like it's just, I remember it was like a kid, like a really sort of kids show, but also kind of like cutesy and stuff. And just I was like, a band named Belle and Sebastian, I'm just not gonna like that band. So then I was like, well, is there a corollary to that? Like I started making two lists, and I'm not gonna list, but like bands that like I first listened to, you know, when I was coming into music, and I was like, I want to listen to that band because their name kicks ass. Now, this list I made, a lot of these bands I don't necessarily like, or they're in the middle for me, and some of them I love, but I start writing down, like, what are, like, bands that I listened to initially, because I was like, what a fucking name that is. And so I wrote, like, Guns N' Roses, Smashing Pumpkins, Sonic Youth, Tragically Hip, you know, like, I was writing down, like, all these, like, really cool, Audio Slave, right? Like, all these great band names, right? And I was like, some of them I like, some of them I don't like, some of them are mid, right? But like, there's a ton of bands that I'm like, I'm going to prioritize them because their name kicks ass. And it feels like I should like a band named Guns N' Roses, you know what I mean? Or like Audio Slave. I might not have always, but you know, it moved them to the front, the name. And then there's like a list of like, what are bands that I hate their names? And then within that, it's like, but how many of them did I like get to anyway? And then which ones did I like not listen to? Because we now have two examples of bands that like I didn't listen to. Like, full disclosure, I really liked both of these albums. Yeah. But I'm like, what are some bands that like I never got around to listening to because of their name, and now I'm listening to them because like they're good because of CTS, right?
Yeah, right.
And all I could think to myself was, I don't think I ever would have listened to Belle and Sebastian without CTS because of the name. And like and then there's like other bands that have terrible names, like the Goo Goo Dolls, who I listened to because they were on the radio, right? But if they were an indie band, I would have never listened to them because I would be like, I don't fucking the Goo Goo Dolls, right? Then there was like stuff like Toad the Wet Sprocket, where I was like, how the hell did I listen to this? But also, it's a terrible name, right? So anyway, it took me down this huge rabbit hole where I wrote down like, like band name, and it really did apply to me like when I was formative, right? Like between 10 and 20, and there's just so many bands to listen to. Like the difference between, am I going to listen to Jesus and Mary Chain? Spoiler alert, yes, because that name kicks ass, right? Like it's like, I feel like I should like a band named Jesus and Mary Chain, right? Like, would I listen to Violent Femmes, right? Like these are bands I figured out because like I like that it's like, am I going to listen to like, Belle and Sebastian? Probably not as much. I think one of the reasons I didn't listen to like Neutral Milk Hotel for a long time was because that name, right? It's like, I don't feel like I should like a band name, Neutral Milk Hotel. Anyway, that's its own thing. I liked both of these albums a lot. I liked if you're feeling Sinister more, Matt, I like immediately was able to get like the difference. Like Tigermilk felt, the highs were high, but there was some stuff that kind of felt more like experimental that didn't hit as much for me. None of the songs were bad, but there were some songs that didn't feel fully formed. I felt like If You're Feeling Sinister was fully formed from start to finish.
Okay.
And I'll give that album one of the biggest pieces of praise I can give an album. We've spent so much time listening to indie singer-songwriter and twee, right? Twee is like a form of music we haven't really talked about yet, but it's that cottagecore, right? Like twee type sound, like real precious, right?
Yeah.
Like I feel deeply type of music. And in a lot of these albums we would listen to, there were parts of it I really liked, but then there was a part of it that didn't totally connect. And it never felt like I came along to an album that like all the pieces came together, right? Like ranging from like Elliott Smith to like Nick Drake and like all these different, groups that we listened to that had pieces of the puzzle, but not the whole thing, right? This was the album where I'm like, all right, this like is the highest level of this that I've heard so far. And like you said, Matt, there's a lot of stuff that comes after this that also largely falls in the reign of, I like some of this, but not all of this. This was the first time where I'm like, this is the full version of this style of music, and I like almost all of this. And if somebody were to say, what's like your indie singer-songwriter, like twee version of stuff, I'd be like, oh, it's this. This is it. This is like the peak of it for me so far because the songs, the lyrical content was excellent. The music was understated, but also really drew me in. It was very intimate in a way that's in a way that I think people who love this style of music, like they like all of it because it all feels intimate to them in a way that I remember joking with my friend, and it's so fun. I owe him a call because I used to always joke around with him. I'm like, you listen to all these intimate singer-songwriters. I said, do you realize like you're a slut, like basically, because like you're intimate with all of them, right? I'm like, you got to have like standards, right? You know what I mean? If all of them speak to you intimately, then you're kind of like you're like you're the loose man of like indie rock, right, and stuff like that.
That's a very interesting way of putting it.
Yeah, that's what I'm here for these takes, right? But you get what I'm saying? It's like, how could all of these things speak to you? You know what I mean? Like after
everything can't mean everything to you. Yeah.
Well, and it's if everything's but this was one that just it spoke to me in a way that felt vulnerable and relatable, and he's like big feelings, you know what I mean? But in a way that like felt really authentic to me. And I don't really know
and not
how to
overly
explain.
hokey, right? Nothing's like hokey really in here. Yeah.
No,
which could
and
be a big turn off for you, I think, at times. For sure.
And I would say that this lane of music is less hokey for me. Like I feel the feelings are, I shouldn't say anybody's feelings aren't valid, but I never feel like the feelings are like not valid. I just feel like there's just so many feelings. You know what I mean? It's like, come on, like there has to be like a leveling of feelings here. Like every relationship you have can't set you back 10 years. Or if you're that type of person, you know what I mean? I can't relate to you because like not everything has meaning, right? You know what I mean? I just can't live in that. But like this didn't feel like that. This felt like, but you get what I'm saying? It's kind of like, just like somebody could be overly cognitive, right? It's like, come on, like you gotta like, not everything's literal. You know, the same thing's the opposite. Like
not everything's a 10, right? Yeah.
Not every fucking girlfriend you had is like a transformatory event in your life. You know what I mean? Some are just a girlfriend you had for 6 months. You know what I mean? And that's why like High Fidelity made me laugh, because it's like people that love High Fidelity, like I know who they are because that's who they are, right? Like everything has meaning. And to the fact where like nothing has meaning. It's like, you know, it's almost like philosophical, right? Like if everything has meaning, then nothing has meaning, you know. But anyway, that's a digression off that. I really, the vibe of this hit me. It's a great winter album.
Yes.
It's cozy. It's an album that just I put it on and like you could sit in a chair and listen to it and it keeps your attention, but it doesn't demand your attention. And every time I put it on though, like I wanted to give it my attention. And my knock sometimes on singer-songwriter stuff is like after you've listened to 40 minutes of it, it's kind of like, you know, like I'm losing a little bit of connection to what's going on here. But that didn't happen. And it's so funny because I listened to these albums back to back, which would seem to almost be built for that. Right. And they didn't lose me. Like at all along the way. They were the perfect length. Both of them were around like 40 to 43 minutes, right? Which is exactly how long an album
both 41,
should
just
be.
different variations of 41. Yeah.
And a theme of this for people in it is they usually do albums that are way too fucking long. You know what I mean? Like singer-songwriters where I'm like, come on, you know, like you don't need 14 songs on this. And this didn't fall into that trap. In many ways, it's like to me the archetype, the blueprint of how to do this style of music. And I think some of that is because it was so accidental that you could tell. I don't want to say the other people aren't authentic because I think they are, but there's always a level of feeling somewhat curated to me. Like in this style of music, like, come on, you know, like this seems accidental, you know what I mean? And seems like real, authentic feeling, but not in any way curated. It just is like a shotgun wedding, like, in terms of like everything coming together that just works all at once. The instrumentation is not masturbatory. It's the correct instrumentation. Another thing that sometimes groups in big feels can get into. It's like, let me put 12 instruments on this because I like the idea of 12. It's like, dude, your stuff is not weighty enough to need 12 instruments. I didn't feel like that with this either. You know what I mean? Like it felt like every instrument belonged there and served its place in it. So, you know, both of these albums I liked a lot. Like I said, If You're Feeling Sinister felt a little bit more finished to me along the way. A real pleasant surprise. Also, like, I am now over the your band name sucks, so I might not listen to you. And that's one of the coolest things about this is that I think I will not have that be as much of a barrier with indie rock I'm listening to going forward. And also, I just can't help but think there's going to be other bands that we cover that were on that list that now, you know, I'm going to discover. And that's kind of exciting to think that there's going to be discoveries like this. And I love finding an act in a genre of music that isn't like a natural default for, you know, my preferences all the time. I love finding albums that allow me to like set bars in styles of music, whether it be electronic music or jazz or, you know, like indie singer-songwriter, you know, like I'm loving like having the ability to do like gradations along the way. So I know that was kind of like a free-form analysis.
Yeah, you were all over the place there, John, but that's okay. I follow most
but that's
of
what
it,
I get paid. That's what I get paid for.
That's
is
right.
To do that shit. That's why the YouTube commenters like me, guys, because they're a special kind of weird like I am. So shout out to the YouTube commenters.
Extemporaneous considerations.
Some.
Yeah,
some do. Others probably just tune me out and don't comment on the YouTube videos. But
well, it is nice having those standards, and these. You know, we always say like finding these bands through the podcast that speak to us, and you know,
it's kind of what we did this for, right?
Yeah,
is to kind of like explore in-depth music, and you know, Matt said it before too. Like all three of us had some variation of I never stumbled into this group, and boy, I'm happy that I stumbled into this because, you know, and this will be a revisit for me. Which is also another thing, an album I didn't know, or in this case albums that like definitely go on my list of when I get free time I'd listen to this again. So I love expanding that list.
I want to clean a stack
Uh-oh.
you know, based on what you said. You were talking
Okay.
about the TV show. It's a French TV show from 1965 that was only 13 episodes long. I do not remember this show being on Nickelodeon, and I don't remember the
was,
show
I
at
think.
all. So
Oh, it had.
I don't see any reference to it being on Nickelodeon, and I feel like I'm pretty well aware of like cartoons
Okay.
and stuff. So maybe you're thinking of something else.
Maybe I'm mixing
Has a
it up.
title. Yeah.
I remember it being French.
Okay.
And I remember, I thought I saw it on Nickelodeon. It's a kids show, right?
Yes. Yep.
I vividly remember watching it's a dog, right?
You're right. It is a dog.
Yeah. It's like a dog and it's a French show.
It's a Great Pyrenees dog. Yep. Like a
Maybe
Saint
it was
Bernard type of.
PBS or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. I remember watching it as
or something. Yeah.
I remember watching it as a kid, and to some degree, when I think of like watching shows as a kid,
Yeah.
I think of Nickelodeon, right? Because it was like weird shit, right?
Right.
Like you can't do that on television and
Oh, I think
Pinwheel
these
and shit
pictures
like
look
that.
somewhat familiar. So
Okay.
I don't know where I saw it either.
I'm not saying you
maybe
didn't see it. Maybe it just wasn't on Nickelodeon.
No, I will absolutely say that maybe I didn't see it on Nickelodeon, but like I definitely remember a French show about a dog
Yeah.
called Belle and Sebastian.
Got
And
it.
I remember thinking, what the fuck? But then again, like I think of Nickelodeon being weird because have you ever gone back and watched an episode of like Pinwheel or You Can't Do That on Television?
yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Yes.
I watched an episode of You Can't Do That on Television. I'm like, how did they make this? Like, you could never make this. They're talking about like masturbation on like a public show, and I'm like, it's awesome that they were doing this, but I'm like, how the fuck did this transgressive show like get on like Nickelodeon, like in my 8-year-old like neighborhood?
I
With
don't
no
remember
one...
them talking about masturbation on that show. I'd be interested to see how they fit that in. But I'm not saying
Yeah,
you're
it
wrong.
just-
I just don't remember
But
that.
like each one had a topic, and it was like, you know, it was pretty. Anyway, and Pinwheel was so fucking. It was like basically somebody took an acid trip and made a kids show out of it. You know,
That
so,
show was. I remember that show being 5 hours long too. I'm like,
Yeah.
why is Pinwheel still? It's the same episode.
Yeah, and I think
started
that's why
3
I thought
hours
it was
ago.
on Nickelodeon, Josh, because I'm like, it just seems like one of those shows that I watched that seemed like it was for adults, but somehow it ended up on a kids' TV station.
Well,
when
they
no one
also
was paying attention.
Yeah, they also networks often grabbed foreign shows and like Americanized them or like put them on those networks. Because I remember watching like Danger Mouse and stuff, and those were, I think that
Oh,
was
that show
European
ruled.
also.
They
Or
lived
even
in the-
like
they lived in
Inspector
the
Gadget
mailbox.
and stuff. Yeah, yeah.
Well,
So anyway, that was a
yeah.
tangent.
Long story short, like I watched the show. I don't know where the fuck from, but I remember it was French and it had subtitles and had a big fucking white dog in it. So
I'm watching it on YouTube right now. So yeah,
Yeah,
okay.
there
Got it.
so report back. Put that on the Letterboxd. So all